So we're going to spend a little time talking about the soft side of construction and job order contracting. That's why the image of the whipped cream on top of the iron bars. So when I worked in the industry a lot, a lot of people said, "Oh, here comes Squishy Dave," and it was because I a lot of times had to deal with the interpersonal efforts, the communications efforts of job order contracting, both with working with owners, working with the contractors, and everybody else in between, and subcontractors and so forth. And so Carl and I, so I'm David Carrithers, I'm with Business Hive, and I do consulting on a variety of efforts, from business startups to, I support a lot of associations. And Carl, do you want to share who you are?
I'm Carl. I've been providing partnering services in JOC since 1991. I mentioned that earlier. And I have a broad background, engineering, construction, subcontractor, and I had a 21-year career in the Navy Reserve, made commander in the Civil Engineer Corps, and was trained in acquisition. So I tell people I've been beat up about every way you can get beat up. And I'm looking forward to sharing some lessons hard learned over 30 years. Thank you.
So Carl and I, this is going to be a dynamic environment, and we're going to be asking for input from everybody and sharing some things, but I wanted to start out with something a little funny.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
So in some ways, job order contracting can feel like that. So I always like a funny video. As you guys, anybody knows me, right, Alan? Got to show a funny video. But it really can be like that at times, right? You got all these things going on, all these projects, and this is a recent survey done by Dell Tech for the engineering and field. And basically, if you look at it, everybody in this room has these pressures on top of them when they're working on whether it's individual projects or programs. I used to like to call JOC a program tool that you could develop these programs, but you've got all these demands coming at you, and how do you deal with all that stuff? And in the end, it's through the people, it's through the relationships, and what I found, just to share a little story of my life. So I invented gift cards. Do you know gift cards, store value cards, prepay cards? I invented those. And in that journey in my life, payment life, way different than JOC and construction, which was a part of my life, I had the opportunity to establish a joint venture between American Express and one of their number one competitors. So what does that have to do with JOC? A lot, because it was bringing two different organizations together and trying to form one thing. And that can be really tricky. And I did a lot of research before the joint venture, and I came forward to American Express and the other company, Merritt's was the name, and I said, 99% of all joint ventures fail within the first year. The remaining percent, most of them fail within the next 3 years. So it's very few joint ventures succeed long term. And I had the honor of putting together this joint venture, and it lasted for 13 years, and it was the single most profitable joint venture in the history of American Express. And in the end, I spent a lot of time, they asked me to, American Express, why did this joint venture, this group of people that came together, succeed and others didn't? And in the end, it was two simple things: alignment. And man, is that tough to get everybody, kind of like the cat herding, getting everybody aligned in management, operations, field, in our case, payment systems, technology, branding, marketing, and it goes on. But to get them all aligned really kept the effort moving forward in the right direction. And then communications. I put a funny picture up there. It's people, well, it's all these cell phones. I don't know about you, but I have actually been in meetings recently where everybody's on their cell phone. And it's like, how do you actually listen to each other when everybody's like that? But it's a key part of success is the communication. We heard Bill say it earlier. I know as part of the training, an element of the process of job order contracting is the interaction between the different groups. And so I'm going to share a little more on the upfront, so before the work actually starts. And some of this, I know you're all some are going to say, oh, that's common sense. But I'm telling you, it gets forgotten, and they are easy things. And the other is the word partnering. I have a hard time with that word. So it has connotations before you even show up. I heard, Bill or somebody presenting earlier said partnering, and I heard somebody say, oh, kumbaya. And that's the perception. Well, let's get together and we'll all love each other. It's not that. I mean, there are elements of, a process of a partnering effort, but really I see that as a key element of alignment. And, you do alignment before you start stuff, you do alignment while you're doing it, and actually at the end to make sure, did it work out? So, we generated over $15 billion in the time at American Express on that joint venture. So it works. And, I wouldn't discount that idea. So for me, I spent 15 years in job order contracting and some IDIQ, but mainly job order contracting. And these are the lessons I learned. So I'm what you would call the corporate guy, a suit that would show up sometimes. And the guys in the field would be like, oh, Dave's here. And, made sure we all had good meals and we all had a chance to sit and talk. But in reality, I was there to do certain things, both with the teams, the contracting teams, but then also the clients. And those were federal clients. Those were states, cities, municipalities, school districts, colleges, universities, you name it. I was part of job order contracting efforts with those organizations. And time and time again, I would say, don't assume they know what they bought. Because a lot of times in public procurement, somebody else is procuring whatever and they get it. So the actual operating area or the area it has to fulfill, construction, there's all different terms. And I know in school districts this happens and they don't really understand what job order contracting is. The people who are going to use it, the procurement people might understand that. That's very true in the federal space. So we would say, don't assume they know what they bought. And what that meant was we'd sit down and we would share with them what the contract meant to them in simple terms. And I'm not talking about 5 hours and people are like, oh, they're not going to want to get together. Let's just get to the work. We'll show them what we are. We'll do the work. And I'd be like, do they understand what you have, what you're doing? And a lot of times they didn't. And, I can remember one city in Arizona. It's cheap. Job order contracting is cheap. And I'd be like, well, where'd that come from? And it was just a misconception, showing them all the other benefits that come with job order contracting. And others thought it was still a version of hard bid. So don't assume they know what they bought. And I would say work together to figure out where to start and learn. And what that means is the first project is important, but understanding the team and the players, who's on that team, what are they, responsible for. And of course, there's some people in this room who are extremely organized and probably do that, and there are others that maybe are not. And it could be so on both the client side, the contracting side, subcontractors, and then the other is to get to know the team. I don't know how many times I've done alignment sessions. I was brought in by NICA, National Association of Electrical Contractors, and the local workers union, Electrical Workers Union, 26 out of DC, and they wanted to work together on a joint association project. And this team had paid for a training school together for 15 years, and they never met as a group. So they had all this built up angst and everything, and they were like, we don't really want to know those people. But in the end, getting to understand who the other people on the team were was key, because what came out was the union guys said that the owners of these electrical contractors didn't understand, and every one of them, I asked them all to take out of their wallets, they were members of that union. So every owner of every electrical contractor that was at this session, there was 15 of them, they all were members of the union, and they had all come up through it. So through that interaction and working together for alignment, two sides that hammered on each other for 15 years, also like they could relate to each other, and they did some amazing things. Same thing with job order contracting. Try to get to know the people you're working with on the team. Sounds silly, but I'm telling you. Set the priorities together. Don't assume you know what their priorities are, vice versa. Don't assume the contractor understands what's important to you. You have to over-communicate at the start. That's key. More communications is better. How do they want to communicate? That was one thing I always would spend time. If I came in, so I was a relief valve. I would come in when things were not maybe going as well, and they'd be like, hey, Dave, can you come and meet with the client? And I'd go sit in their office, and I'd ask them, how do you want to be communicated? And everybody was different. Oh, I want to know right away if there's a problem. Oh, if there's a problem on this project, this school, this what have you. If we're going to have a delay, I would like, again, I like an email. I want a text. I want a phone call. And actually, some of us in this room that are on the younger side maybe are more comfortable just texting stuff. Well, you may be working with somebody who doesn't want that. They want a phone call. This is a big problem at the Pentagon, that there's a lot of younger people in control at the Pentagon. And one of the problems I found is that they want to text. And older people, and I say older, 45 older, 50 older, want a phone call. They want to have an interaction. So you have to take that into account. And so I would just sit and say, how do you want to be communicated? The other was I'd make sure that we had all the right communications information, emails, phone numbers, where they worked, where they sat. And I'd share that back out with everybody. And any issues we had didn't solve it 100%, but all of a sudden people felt like they could connect to the right people at the right time. And, everything from, I had a situation where a school district was very hyper on having temporary buildings brought on campus, and they wanted to know the timings and everything. And nobody would tell them if they were going to be delayed or on time, and it would make the client really upset. And because all of a sudden they'd be rolling, because we're going to get the work done, we're going to get it done. And they would roll these temporary classrooms in place and not have done the basics of, hey, we're doing it on this date. Of course they had a project plan, everything was organized, but the client didn't understand it and they weren't communicating. The other is the first three projects. I always notice the first three projects, if they go south or there's issues, all the projects are going to have problems. So watch and stay on top, especially as the leadership and owners or the directors of these things. Watch those first ones, because if there's misconceptions or misunderstandings, that'll come out during that. And then the others have a relief valve. So I'm not a construction person, I'm a relationship person. And I would show up to just check up, see how the relationship's doing. And again, a lot of times the local field teams didn't like this, because they're like, they're my client, why are you doing this? Are you trying to find something about me to bring it back and get me in trouble? And I was like, no, I'm here to help make sure everything's going well. And I was amazed at what clients would tell me. There's a school district in Virginia. I just took the guy out for coffee, the head of construction. And he said, I love you guys, but here's a problem, there's a problem, this person's a problem. A lot of times they don't want to talk about an individual they're having a communications issue with, and I could go back and I could fix that. So these are all relationship things. These are not pricing and how do we do cost engineering, or how do we come up with a coefficient. There's tons of stuff on that. What I'm talking about is the relationship side of it. How do we deal with the interpersonal skills? Because all the contracting methods, I'm also very involved in DBIA, Design Build Institute of America, was early on. And it's a relationship tool, just like JOC is. And the problem is it's the people interacting with each other. It's not the actual legal stuff. I always, when somebody said, in the contract it says, and get our lawyer in the room or whatever, man, that's not how to operate a relationship, and you've missed something and now have wandered into a very dangerous area. And I can almost predict that contract or that client would go away. Somebody said earlier that JOC is interesting because a lot of times if somebody doesn't like the performance of one contractor or one interaction of group of contractors, even if it's a multiple award, they then say JOC doesn't work. So the onus is on everybody in the industry to make sure they're providing the best service they can for job board and contracting, because there's a lot of other choices out there. And if you move into the federal realm, SMACs and all these other tools they have, JOC slides off. Well, that didn't work. JOC didn't work. So it is a relationship tool. And that's where so over a long period of time, I worked with Carl, and Carl's worked with a lot of different job board of contracting and construction environments. And he has a couple of tools he's used I thought would be worth him sharing on.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to make a bold statement. I came here with the intention of creating an opportunity for everybody in this room to have a life-changing experience if you choose to. I think it's going to be evident as I go through this what that meant, but I'll check back in with you later. I want to start by telling you how I got interested in cooperation. I was a 24-year-old junior officer in the Navy. I was an engineer on a small combatant ship, and the engineer is responsible for managing overhauls. I went on board the ship. It was in a dry dock, a floating dry dock in Long Beach, managed that overhaul. 2 years later, I was coming up on my release from active duty, and I was managing the second overhaul. It was in the SEBN shipyard in Naples, Italy. We had to have our work package submitted a year ahead of time so it could all be translated into Italian, all the materials procured, sent over there, and our sister ship was going through the overhaul at the same time. We were scheduled for a 15-week overhaul. It's a lot of work. And a shipyard, if you've ever been in one, it's not terribly dissimilar to a JOC. There's a lot of different work orders going on, people climbing over each other. I got my crew together, and I knew that the engineer officer on the other ship and the engineering chief were both screamers. You know what I mean? Screamers. So I got my crew together and said, look, if the Italian ship workers have an opportunity to choose which ship they work on, I want them to work on our ship. So we're going to take care of them. If they need anything, you get it. If they have a question or a problem, you find an answer. We finished 2 weeks early, and our sister ship finished a week late. And that taught me the importance and significance in terms of productivity that relationships are. Why do I say that cooperation is a science? Dave mentioned feelings about the word partnering. I've actually stopped using it most of the time. I use the term strategic cooperation. And I distinguish between strategy and tactics this way. Strategy answers the question, how will we succeed? Tactic answers the question, what will we do? If you start talking about what you will do before you understand how you will succeed, the probability of you optimizing your efforts is virtually zero. And what I've learned, strategic cooperation is about actually getting together in a leadership context and committing your entire team to finding ways to cooperate, to eliminate unproductive behaviors and actions that challenge trust, and that can be done in a scientific approach. What does that mean? If you understand the structure of cooperation, and I'm going to share that with you in just a second, the governing principles, an example of a principle, make clear, appropriate, and doable agreements. We heard earlier from the panel how important it is to be very careful how you structure the contract. Dave mentioned how important it is to sit down and go over the contract and communicate and make sure the understanding is there. Clear, appropriate, doable agreements. Another principle, do all you have agreed to do. I can't tell you how many partnering workshops I've followed up on when the action plan that came out of the first workshop, not even half the things were done. You can't cooperate if you don't listen to each other, agree on how you're going to work together, and then actually do it and hold each other accountable. And the third thing, the key behavioral dimensions. It's been interesting to me to hear people talk about we partner all the time. We have meetings, we communicate, we solve problems, and that's great. The question is, do you measure behaviors, track trends, and continuously improve your partnering? Many businesses modeled their processes. You start looking at them, and they're business and operational processes. Cooperation is an input to every single business process or operational process you can develop. But in my experience, virtually nobody models cooperation and continuously improves it. Now think about that for a minute. Think about the lost productivity. What does that look like? Benefits of formalized partnering, cooperation. There was a study done by CII in the late 90s. They looked at 192 projects that had formalized partnering. A study was done out of Clemson. It was roughly $800 million worth of work. That's only $4 million a contract, roughly. So we're not talking about huge $100 million projects. We're talking about everyday JOC level work in a year's time. More productive, safer, higher quality, reduced conflict, 50% reduction in rework. Now just stop and think about how that changes your life. 50% reduction in rework. Rework is one of the most demoralizing and frustrating things in construction. Costs less. Now I'm going to read you some numbers. They concluded in those 192 projects that the overall total cost savings was 10%. Contractors in those projects reported increased profit as high as 25%. Now, what does that say? To me, what that says is that it's financially irresponsible to not formalize your cooperation process. Does anybody have any kind of experience that could corroborate that?
We did a large-scale franchise renovation program with a quick serve company, and we were also running a statewide contract in the state of Georgia with the JOC program, and we were able to see those costs apples to apples, and we were seeing 40 to 50% differences in sub costs to do the private work with no cooperation, rampant schedules, unpredictable franchisees, punch lists that were never ending just because of internal issues that they had. So, I mean, the cost it's probably hard to really put a finger on, but as far as what the contract values were relative to what we could do in a JOC program, easily 50%. savings.
Thank you.
That's cool.
I've included in your handout, there's a one-page, I'll mention another example. In your handout, there's a one-page summary case study of Mobil Oil Company. This is what it looks like. Mobil Oil Company did a RCRA project, that's Resource Conservation Recovery Act, at a refinery in Houston. They're members of CII, and they had heard about the 10% savings potential. So they got together with Bechtel on the front end for program management, and they jointly made a commitment to practice formalized partnering in this project. They had very accurate cost and schedule models from other refineries doing virtually the same thing. They had to collect all the stormwater off the site, move it to a central location, process the distillates out of it, and then reintroduce the purified water to the environment. They set as a goal to save that 10%, and they budgeted 0.2% of the total program for the formalized process. They hired a highfalutin, high-paid consultant like me, and they went to work. They tracked data, there's lessons learned in there, but the upshot of the whole thing, when they finished, they were a month early, and I don't know how much environmental work you've done, but that's almost unheard of. They had excellent safety performance and customer satisfaction from the site refinery staff, and they finished 15% under budget. Now, what is 15% divided by 0.2%? Best I can tell, that's about a 75-to-1 benefit to cost. Put that in your pipe and smoke on it. What amazes me is I promote that. I go out and I call on a prospect and I say 10% savings, up to 75-to-1 benefit to cost. And they say, well, what else you want to talk about? It just amazes me that people don't recognize that you can formalize cooperation and dramatically improve your costs. Positive atmosphere. Okay, now I'm going to share something with you. There is another handout. It's got the red lines on it. It's a picture of 7 bubbles. And these 7 bubbles comprise a generic definition of success in pretty much any business undertaking. You have leadership and management, cooperation, continuous improvement, quality, schedule, cost, and satisfaction. Okay? Now what this diagram shows you, the handout diagram with the red arrows, we're looking for the logical relationships between those individual objectives. So what you see, if you take leadership and management and compare it to cooperation, are those two objectives related in some way? You tell me. Are they related? Yes. If they're related, which one drives the other? Leadership drives cooperation. You follow me? So you draw a red arrow from leadership to cooperation. Obviously, leadership drives everything else. But then look at cooperation. Cooperation drives everything but leadership. As I said earlier, cooperation is an input to every business process you do, but nobody models cooperation. If you don't have models of your leadership system, your cooperation system, collect data and continuously improve those, you cannot optimize your operations. The only alternative to management of your systems by data is management by assumption. The approach I use is I always collect data, always. I do interviews, I conduct surveys. I have a 37-question survey called the Team Character Inventory that I'm allowed to use, have permission to use. You would be amazed what I can tell you about what's going on in your project by having people fill out that 37-question survey. You would be amazed. I was blown away. When I realized as an engineer that behavioral scientists developed surveys to predict the behavior of teens, and they analyzed those survey models the same way I analyze structural models to predict the behavior of structure. Wow, that's pretty cool. If you're not doing that, you cannot optimize cooperation. You can identify individual problems, what's called low-hanging fruit. I've been back to projects many times where I conducted a follow-up survey. Trust was good before. We had a program, come back a year later, year and a half later, 2 years later, trust is in the tank. Are you familiar with the principle of entropy? The thermodynamic principle of entropy. Basically, what entropy says is in a closed system, if you're not introducing energy into the system, it will decline over time. It's inevitable. It's a physical principle. Same thing is true in a team. If you're not investing energy into continuously improving, over time, people get complacent. They start overlooking things. Oh, we've got a good relationship. We don't have to worry about that. And then the next thing you know, trust is in the tank. That's why cause, effect is what this conveys. The other thing that's interesting is that most businesses measure effectual parameters. They measure schedule, cost, and quality, customer satisfaction. All of those are the effects of good leadership and cooperation happening on the front end. If you're not measuring those, you're measuring effects. Now, one of the things that fascinates me, and I heard up here on stage, we're partnering. You know, we're good partners. We don't need to facilitate because we know what we're doing. If I ask 5 of you what cooperation looks like, I guarantee I'll get at least 5 answers. So if we don't sit down on the front end with each other, face to face, in the same room, and decide what does cooperation mean to us in this undertaking at this time, then you're not really clear in what you're doing. You're operating on assumptions. Now, the way this model was developed, the way I learned about this model, and this is the structure, the model I mentioned in the science, I would ask this room to tell me, you tell me, what does cooperation look like? Start brainstorm. Just throw words out. What does cooperation look like? Anybody, anything? Teamwork. Teamwork, trust, communication, common goals. What? Transparency. Honesty. Feedback. Listening. Common goals. Conflict resolution. So we brainstorm. And I write on a piece of Post-it note, I stick it on my chart paper. It's not uncommon to have 40, 50 things that turned out. I can't remember that. You can't remember that. I've never done that exercise twice where I got exactly the same things on the Post-it notes. So what I found over time is I could sort it out into 3 elements. I can remember 3 things. And what fascinates me about this is a triangle is the simplest stable structure in nature. Stable structure. If you take care of these 3 things effectively, you will be cooperating. Bottom left corner, position. Who are you? Who am I? Where are you coming from? Where am I coming from? Why are you doing this? Why am I doing this? Who are we together? Where are we going together? Why are we doing this together? This room, each one of you is in a different position. Each one of you is looking at exactly the same data in this room, but you see a different picture. If you don't share with each other how you see things and agree how we are commonly going to look at things, you cannot be fully cooperative. Right-hand corner, skills. Skills is what we do. Listening, understanding other people, empathy, resolving conflict. How many of you were taught how to resolve conflict when you were growing up? How many of you were taught how to listen effectively in school? You know, soft skills we're not taught. Just kind of figure them out, fumble your way through. The soft skills are the ones that cause the problems in cooperation. And I heard people up here talk about how important it is to have training and development programs in a partnering initiative. Well, you got to recognize, you know, you got to take time and assess, how are we doing? Who knows how to do what? What do we need to help people with? And then the last one at the top is process. And process is how and when you do things together. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a project and somebody says, well, the contractor's taking too long with estimates. It says in the contract they got to do them in 2 weeks. Well, did you give them all the information they needed? Did you give them a lead time to tell them what was coming? You can't just go by the contract, like David said. You got to take time to sit down and agree. How are we going to do things together? When should it happen? Principles. I mentioned principles. If I hold this pen out and I let go of it, what do you expect to happen? It'll drop. Okay? Do you know what epistemology is? Epistemology is the science of how we know things. How do you know it's going to fall? Experience and gravity. Okay? In this example, your experience is aligned with the fundamental principle you learned in school. How many of you know what the principles of cooperation are? Who taught you those? So what happens is we go through life having experiences that teach us I have to take care of myself or I'll get screwed. And you go into a relationship, we're going to cooperate. But then something happens and it reminds you, I got screwed the last time that happened. Where does cooperation go? Whoosh, out the window, right? Purpose, why are we doing this together? Character, what does cooperation behavior look like? Direction, what's our plan? How are we going to deal with conflict? How are we going to solve problems? Agreements, who's doing what when? And then improvement. If you're not improving, there's no such thing as a steady state system. If you're not improving, you're declining. Fundamental principles, there's more to it than that, but I'm just trying to give you a flavor for it. Okay, and then I mentioned the key behavioral dimensions. These 4 dimensions came out of a study by Chris Argyris back in the late 70s. He's a behavioral scientist, and it blew my mind when I saw faith as one of the 4. But basically, trust is a subjective choice. You choose whether or not you're going to trust in any given situation. And that trust, or that choice, is based on every single thing that's happened to you up to that instant in time. And you have unconscious memories in the back of your mind that you're not even thinking about that influence your willingness to trust in any given situation. You have models in your mind of what certain behaviors should be or shouldn't be, and you see those behaviors and don't even realize they're registering in your mind because it's all unconscious. And then you make a choice to trust or not trust. I can't influence what's happened to you up to this point, but what I can do is help you sit down and talk. What does dependability look like to us in this undertaking, and how can we hold each other accountable for being dependable? What is responsiveness? Responsiveness is how you respond to people. A lot of times, just helping people define what their needs are is an important part of responsiveness. You can't respond to a need you don't know. You can't respond to an expectation that hasn't been expressed. And then the ability to resolve conflict. That's a whole nother presentation. But basically what I've found is if you take time to clearly define and write down a formal written conflict resolution process that includes collecting all the information we need, make sure that everybody involved in this issue is notified and can participate in the process. Agree on what our evaluation criteria are going to be. How will we evaluate the alternatives? And if you work together, you can eliminate conflict and turn it into problem solving. It's much more effective. I'm not going to get into this a little more. Anyway, basically what this is trying to show, what I learned for myself when I started getting into conflict is that I was emotionally programmed to be very competitive. Emotionally, I was a win-lose thinker. And I actually had to learn that I was damaging relationships by being so competitive. When I was involved in a conflict, I would stay after someone. It wasn't enough for me to say, I got my win. I would push on somebody trying to make them say, you're right, I'm wrong. You win, I lose. That was a strategy that was unconscious in my being. That kind of thing happens all the time. You have people who tend to avoid conflict, okay? And they give their power away when they do that. Now, what this is about, this concept, is there's different ways to look at power in a relationship, but this context is if we're competing for who has the most power, I'm trying to manipulate and coerce and take power away from you and keep you from taking my power, I think of that as a two-power relationship. It's a competition for who has the most power in the relationship. And the concept there is there's a limited amount, we have to compete for it. The other possibility is maybe if there's a source of power outside of us, if we could call on that source of power and empower the other person, and they're focused on empowering us, we can actually grow the power in our relationship and do more. In this context, the definition I use, ability to do, capacity to act. You can help each other get better by focusing on empowering each other. Think about that for a minute. The potential is unlimited to grow power in your relationship. Okay. Trust equation, basically you can measure trust. And I tried it. There's Stephen Covey's son wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. I don't remember how many dimensions he had. It's like 25 or something like that. It's to me, it's just an untenable model. You can't keep track of all of it. So I try to make this model as simple as possible. Get to know each other, agree on what dependable behavior looks like, how are we going to respond to each other, and then make sure you have faith in each other in the process that you're going to stick together. Minimize the lack of information, make sure you share everything that needs to be known, resolve your conflicts, and manage risk together. If you do those things, you can continuously grow trust in a relationship. Questions or comments?
Has anybody in here ever had a situation where trust was lost? Whether in work or not? I mean, yeah, right? And you can feel it almost, right? How hard is it to get that back? Very hard, right? Almost impossible. I've heard a city I once met with, and for whatever reason, an estimate had been compiled, and there was manipulation of how many dumpsters or something, and everybody gets into how many dumpsters are in this thing and all this stuff. But in that process of the contractor and the owner fighting, the trust was lost on both sides, and it escalated to the point where it was personal almost. But that went from a $21 million a year partner to a zero that was almost impossible to get back. So trust has a direct impact on financial well-being, because on one side, you always have the business to worry about. And I think as you go as owners say, you want your contractors to do well so they stick around and they want to work with you, not the other way. Sorry, Paul.
One quick story, and I'm done. I was called, and it's kind of interesting to me because Dave today has been batting leadoff, and I'm batting cleanup, right? Well, I got called into I couldn't count how many projects to clean up a mess. You know, we don't call Carl until we have a problem we can't handle. So I go in, I collect data. And over time, I developed my own instrument. I have a survey that it only has 15 questions. It has 5 each for dependability, responsiveness, and the ability to resolve conflict. And I went into this project. The contractor's project general manager was a professional mechanical engineer. Called him, talked to him on the phone, and he said, I got to be honest with you, Carl. I think partnering is a bunch of crap. I don't think it works. Okay, give me a chance. Went in, and we had a great workshop. It was only one day. It should have been more, but we got a lot done in one day. He was a convert. I said, Carl, I'm impressed. You've changed my mind. So I developed this instrument, and I went to him, and I said, look, I have this suggestion. Let's use this instrument to measure the key dimensions of behavior and see what happens. Yeah, that's a good idea. So we put the survey together, and there were 3 major organizations. There was the contractor, there was the engineering, and there was procurement. So what we did was we had each organization evaluate their own behavioral performance on one instrument. Then the second instrument for that it's the same exact instrument, evaluate partner number 1 and evaluate partner number 2. And then each organization did that same thing. Well, when we started collecting that data, what we found was every single organization rated themselves higher than the other 2 partners. Anybody surprised? I'm a good partner, he's the problem, right? We did that every quarter. The 3rd time we did it, I sat down, I'm processing the data, and I went, holy cow. Every single organization had bifurcated, and they rated their partners higher than they rated themselves. Now, what does that say? It says they woke up and realized partnering doesn't happen over there. It happens right here. And they embraced it, and they had an amazing contract, over $20 million a year, one of the most profitable contracts that company ever had. And it was because that project general manager had an epiphany. He had a life-changing experience, just like I promised you. And he took it to heart, and he made it work. It was very powerful. Thank you.
So any questions or anything for Carl related to situations? Maybe, hey, we got this kind of thing going on.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention one more thing. There's one handout that I had also wanted to make sure that I brought you some tools that you can take out of here and use tomorrow to do a better job of cooperating. This one handout is a summary of that CII report I referenced with the data early in the process, or early in the presentation. And the first page is the benefits. You can read about it. But the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th pages is a 5-phase partnering process model that CII recommends you use as a basis for developing your partnering strategy. Each of the phases has bullets for specific issues that need to be addressed and discussed and agreed upon. You'll notice that phase number 1 is owner's internal preparation. Some of that we heard about this morning. Do we have the qualified people? Do we need to do training? What are our values? What's important to us? What are we looking for in a partner, et cetera, et cetera. That's owner's internal preparation. 2nd phase, partner selection. Include relationship alignment conditions in your evaluation criteria for who you want to partner with. I learned from my ex-wife, you can't partner with somebody who doesn't want to partner. She probably felt the same way about me.
So, Carl, we have a question.
Okay.
Quick, not necessarily a question, but a comment. Everything you're saying is absolutely right on and absolutely important. But before you even get to what you're doing, you have to have the atmosphere to do that. And what I'm saying in an atmosphere is the traditional way of doing business plan, inspect, low bid, you cannot do this. It's impossible. You're halfway there as a JOC contractor because you've established that opportunity and you've got to have that trust because you're giving all that risk management to the contractor and making him do it. But you've got to complete the circle. And now it's a little bit of a how I call it, a commercial. If you're not using a cooperative to do that, to set that atmosphere, it isn't going to work. I'm telling you, you're going to have a problem.
Well, that's what this phase one is about.
There you
Owners'
go.
internal preparation.
There you go.
And there's different ways to go about it. One is to go about a cooperative association
Right.
who already has the parts and pieces in place and can
Exactly.
help that owner.
Right.
But the owner could do their own, or you could work with them and help them do things that they haven't done.
That's right. You got to have that trust and you got to have that relationship. And that's the atmosphere that makes that happen.
Agreed. And it's all about building the right culture. Okay, so then phase three is relationship alignment. Phase four is project or program alignment. And phase five in this model is work process alignment. And like David said, very often you see the contract award and everybody wants to start talking about work processes. And if you don't do the relationship alignment and the program alignment before you talk about work processes, you're asking for trouble. And then there's one other sheet in here that takes those two phases, phase 3 and 4, looks like this. I took all the bullets out of phases 3 and 4 in the CII model, put them on Post-it notes, and I started sorting them out. And the red elements are barriers to those issues working well. The black elements are recommendations. And you'll see it wound up in 7 major categories: organization and staffing, alignment, trust, communication, resources, conflict resolution, and measurement. If you don't take care of those 7 issues, you're not formally cooperating. If you don't have measurement processes, you cannot continuously improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Well, thank you, Carl. So, a lot of ground to cover, and I appreciate everybody, sticking with us on it. And in the end, what I learned was that if you go into something, especially with job order contracting, it allows for this, to really say, I want to set up something different. And I was always amazed at people who would join the team who had, umpteen years of construction experience. Alan, yourself, or Terry, or somebody that had years of experience, and coming then into job order contracting, how much more rewarding it was to be able to work in a way where you're working together with a housing authority or whoever, and it was not conflict oriented. It was, how do we get this all done under the budget that you have? So it's different, but you have to go to it thinking that way. Like you said, you got to have a mental, picture around it. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.